Ultrasound reveals twin pregnancy, but one baby stunned everyone. What is going on, and would it affect the mother? To find out, watch to the end. But first, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss stories like this again. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Claire Harper, a bright-eyed elementary school teacher, nervously sat in the waiting room of the Meadowbrook Women's Clinic. The walls were painted a cheerful pastel green, with soft lullabies playing in the background, but the calm atmosphere did nothing to soothe the storm of anxiety twisting inside her. She clutched her husband's hand tightly, her knuckles white as she whispered, "What if something's wrong, Mike?" Mike, ever the optimist, gave her a reassuring smile, though even his usually steady demeanor betrayed a hint of unease. "Everything's going to be fine," he murmured. "This is just a routine checkup." Claire was 12 weeks into her pregnancy, and this ultrasound appointment was supposed to confirm what the home pregnancy tests and early symptoms had already told her. But the journey hadn't been smooth. Just a week before, she'd experienced sharp cramps that left her doubled over in pain. Her OB/GYN, Dr. Celeste Ramirez, had assured her that some cramping could be normal during the first trimester. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. When the nurse finally called her name, Claire's heart pounded like a drum. She and Mike followed her into the dimly lit ultrasound room, where a technician named Jenny greeted them with a warm smile. Claire lay down on the examination table, her breath catching as Jenny spread the cool gel across her abdomen. The machine hummed to life, and the screen lit up with grainy black and white images. Claire craned her neck to see, her eyes searching for any sign of her baby. Jenny's expression was unreadable as she moved the transducer across Claire's stomach. The room felt unbearably silent, save for the faint static of the machine. Then, finally, Jenny's face lit up with a smile. "Well, congratulations," she said. "It looks like you're having twins." Claire's jaw dropped. "Twins," she echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief. Mike laughed nervously, his hand tightening around hers. "Wow, that's amazing," he said, though his wide eyes suggested he was still processing the news. But just as the initial shock began to settle, Jenny's brow furrowed. She tilted her head, scrutinizing the screen as she adjusted the transducer's position. Claire's stomach tightened with dread. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jenny hesitated, her professional smile slipping for a moment. "I'm going to call Dr. Ramirez in to take a look," she said. "Sometimes these machines pick up odd reflections, and I just want to make sure everything is okay." The cheerful tone in her voice didn't match the worried look in her eyes. When Dr. Ramirez entered the room, her presence was both comforting and ominous. She exchanged a brief glance with Jenny before taking over the ultrasound. "Let's take another look," she said, her voice calm and measured. Claire couldn't help but notice how intently the doctor's eyes were fixed on the screen. She traced the outline of one baby, pointing out the fluttering heartbeat, then moved to the second. "Two strong heartbeats," she said, smiling softly at Claire and Mike. But as the transducer shifted slightly, her expression grew serious. She paused, her gaze narrowing on an unusual shape near the second baby. "Claire," she began carefully, "I'm seeing something that doesn't quite fit." Claire's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. Dr. Ramirez took a deep breath. "There appears to be a third structure, but it's not behaving like a fetus." Mike's face went pale. "What does that mean? Is it dangerous?" Dr. Ramirez didn't answer right away. Instead, she adjusted the settings on the machine, zooming in on the mysterious shape. It was round and irregular, unlike the defined silhouettes of the twins. "It could be a number of things," she said finally. "A benign cyst, a mass, or something else entirely. We'll need to run some tests." The room spun as Claire tried to process what she was hearing. Twins? A possible mass? Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but she forced herself to focus on Dr. Ramirez's voice. "We'll schedule an MRI to get a clearer picture," the doctor continued. "For now, I want you to try to stay calm. The twins look healthy, and that's a very good sign." But staying calm was easier said than done. As soon as they left the clinic, Claire broke down in the car. "What if it's cancer?" she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Mike wrapped an arm around her, his own fears evident in the tightness of his grip. We don't know anything yet, he said, though his voice wavered. We'll take it one step at a time. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and restless nights. Claire scoured the internet for any information she could find, but the more she read, the more terrified she became. Terms like teratoma and molar pregnancy swirled in her mind, each possibility more frightening than the last. When the day of the MRI finally arrived, Claire felt like she was walking into a nightmare. The procedure itself was uneventful, but waiting for the results was pure torture. Dr. Ramirez called them into her office 2 days later, her expression grave yet compassionate. The MRI confirmed what we saw in the ultrasound, she began. There's a mass in your uterus near the second baby. It's not a fetus, but it does appear to be growing. Claire's stomach churned. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez hesitated, choosing her words carefully. We believe it's a rare condition called a parasitic twin. Essentially, it's a malformed twin that didn't fully develop. It's not viable as a baby, but it's receiving nutrients from your body just like the healthy twins. Claire felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. A parasitic twin? The concept was almost too surreal to comprehend. Is it dangerous? Mike asked, his tone sharp with protective urgency. Dr. Ramirez nodded solemnly. It can be. The risk is primarily to Claire, as the mass could cause complications with the pregnancy or interfere with the delivery. We'll need to monitor it very closely. The weight of the doctor's words hung heavily in the air, pressing down on Claire and Mike like an invisible force. Claire's hands instinctively went to her stomach, as though shielding her unborn children from the ominous reality unfolding before her. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez leaned forward, her gaze steady but compassionate. For now, the best course of action is careful monitoring. We'll conduct regular ultrasounds and tests to ensure that the mass isn't interfering with the twins' growth or your health. If it poses a threat, we may need to intervene, but I want to avoid that unless absolutely necessary. The twins are thriving right now, and that's our priority. On the drive home, Claire stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Mike broke the silence, his voice soft but firm. We'll get through this, together, you and me, like always. Claire gave a weak smile, grateful for his unwavering support, but the knot in her chest refused to loosen. Every moment of joy about the twins was now shadowed by fear, a relentless whisper of what-ifs that refused to be silenced. As the weeks passed, Claire threw herself into maintaining as normal a routine as possible. She continued teaching, finding solace in the bright laughter of her students. But the cloud of uncertainty loomed constantly. Each ultrasound brought a mix of relief and tension. The twins were growing well, but so was the parasitic mass. It seemed to have a life of its own, feeding off her body in a way that felt both alien and intrusive. One afternoon, during her 20-week anatomy scan, Dr. Ramirez delivered news that sent Claire's heart plummeting. The mass is growing faster than we anticipated, she said, pointing to the screen where the grainy image of the twins was overshadowed by the irregular shape of the parasitic twin. It's beginning to press against baby B's amniotic sac. This could lead to complications like restricted growth or preterm labor. What does that mean for the twins? Mike asked, his voice tight with concern. Dr. Ramirez hesitated before replying, her expression grim. It means we need to consider surgical intervention sooner rather than later. If we wait too long, it could endanger all three of you. The idea of surgery terrified Claire. She couldn't bear the thought of putting her babies at risk, but the alternative was equally frightening. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Mike held her close. We'll make the right choice, he whispered, whatever it takes to keep you and the babies safe. The next morning, Claire and Mike met with a team of specialists, including a fetal surgeon. Dr. Ellen Park, a no-nonsense woman with years of experience, laid out the options. We can attempt a fetal surgery to remove the parasitic twin, she explained. It's a delicate procedure with risks, but it might be the best chance to ensure the twins' safety. The goal would be to preserve as much of the pregnancy as possible. Claire felt like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff. the weight of the decision threatening to push her over. "What are the risks?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Park didn't sugarcoat the truth. "There's a risk of preterm labor, infection, or complications with the twins. But if we don't act, the mass could continue to grow, increasing the likelihood of a crisis later on." After hours of agonizing discussion, Claire and Mike decided to proceed with the surgery. It felt like the lesser of two evils, a chance to take control of a situation that had spiraled into chaos. The days leading up to the procedure were a whirlwind of tests, consultations, and preparations. Claire tried to stay strong, but the fear was overwhelming. Every night she prayed for a miracle, clutching the ultrasound pictures of her twins like a lifeline. The morning of the surgery arrived far too quickly. As she was wheeled into the operating room, Claire's heart pounded like a drum. The bright lights and sterile smells were disorienting, but Mike's voice echoed in her mind. "You're the strongest person I know. You've got this." The procedure was a marathon, lasting several hours. Dr. Park and her team worked with precision, navigating the delicate balance of removing the parasitic twin without harming the healthy babies. Claire drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind a haze of fear and hope. When she finally woke up in the recovery room, the first thing she saw was Mike's tear-streaked face. "You're okay," he said, his voice breaking. "The twins are okay." Relief washed over her like a tidal wave, but it was short-lived. Dr. Park appeared at the foot of her bed, her expression serious. "The surgery was successful in removing the parasitic twin," she said, "but there were complications. Baby B's sac was ruptured during the procedure, and we'll need to monitor closely for signs of preterm labor." The news hit Claire like a punch to the gut. She'd fought so hard to protect her babies, but the battle was far from over. For the next few weeks, she was placed on strict bed rest, her every movement monitored. Each passing day felt like an eternity, a delicate dance between hope and despair. She celebrated every small milestone, a strong heartbeat at an ultrasound, another week without contractions, but the shadow of what-ifs never left her. As the weeks stretched on, Claire's life became a fragile balancing act of survival and hope. Bed rest was not just physically taxing, but mentally exhausting. Confined to her bedroom, she had too much time to think, too many hours to let her fears spiral unchecked. Mike, ever the anchor, did his best to keep her spirits up. He read books to her, brought her favorite meals, and even transformed the bedroom into a cozy sanctuary, complete with fairy lights and framed ultrasound pictures of their twins. Yet, the uncertainty gnawed at both of them. At 26 weeks, Claire began to notice subtle changes in her body, tightening sensations low in her abdomen, almost like a warning bell. She dismissed them at first, chalking it up to the normal discomforts of pregnancy. But one evening, as she shifted in bed, a sharp pain shot through her, stealing her breath. A wave of nausea followed, and then she felt it, a sudden warm gush. Her heart sank as she realized what it meant. "Mike!" she cried out, her voice shaking. He was at her side in seconds, his face a mask of panic as he saw the blood staining the sheets. They rushed to the hospital, Claire clutching her stomach as if sheer willpower could keep her babies safe. The drive was a blur of headlights and tears, Mike's trembling hand gripping hers. By the time they arrived, Claire was sobbing, her worst fears threatening to consume her. The nurses worked quickly, hooking her up to monitors and administering medications to slow her contractions. Dr. Ramirez arrived not long after, her expression grave but composed. "Claire," she said gently, "you're experiencing preterm labor. We're going to do everything we can to keep the babies inside as long as possible, but you need to prepare yourself. There's a chance they may come early." Claire's world tilted. She knew the risks of premature birth, undeveloped lungs, fragile immune systems, the possibility of long-term complications. "How early?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Right now, you're at 26 weeks. Every day they stay inside increases their chances significantly. We're going to fight for every single day." For the next week, Claire was kept under constant observation. The hospital room became her new reality, a sterile cocoon of beeping machines and IV drips. Nurses bustled in and out, their efficiency both comforting and unnerving. Mike never left her side, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair and refusing to let her face any of it alone. Despite their best efforts, Claire's condition continued to deteriorate. By the end of the week, her contractions had grown stronger, more insistent, like the babies were determined to make their entrance no matter the odds. Dr. Ramirez came to her bedside, her eyes filled with both determination and caution. "Claire, we've reached the point where the risks of keeping them in outweigh the benefits. We need to deliver." The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. Claire's breath caught as fear gripped her heart. "Are they going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez didn't sugarcoat her response. "They're fighters, but they're early, and it's going to be a long road." The delivery was an orchestrated chaos, a team of specialists ready to spring into action the moment the twins were born. Claire's heart pounded as she was wheeled into the operating room, the bright lights blinding. She gripped Mike's hand as the doctors prepped her for an emergency C-section. "You're so strong," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're amazing." The first cry was weak but unmistakable, a sound that brought both relief and terror. "Baby A," one of the nurses announced, holding up a tiny, wriggling figure. Claire barely had time to register the sight before they whisked the baby away to the neonatal intensive care unit. Moments later, a second cry pierced the air. "Baby B," the nurse called out, this one even smaller than the first. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she watched the nurses rush to stabilize her babies. They were so small, their fragile bodies dwarfed by the equipment surrounding them. "Are they okay?" she asked, her voice desperate. Dr. Ramirez nodded, though her expression was cautious. "They're alive, Claire. That's the first battle won." For the next several days, Claire and Mike lived in the liminal space of the NICU, their lives revolving around the incubators where their babies fought to survive. Each day brought a new challenge: oxygen levels that dipped too low, feeding tubes that needed adjustment, infections that threatened to take hold. Claire's heart broke every time she saw her babies covered in wires and tubes, their tiny fists clenched as if they, too, were fighting with all their might. Baby A, whom they named Grace, seemed to fare slightly better. Her lungs, though underdeveloped, responded well to treatment. Baby B, named Oliver, faced a tougher battle. His birth had ruptured the amniotic sac, leading to a significant loss of fluid in utero, and his tiny body struggled to keep up. "He's a fighter," the nurses reassured Claire and Mike, but the worry never left their hearts. One night, as Claire sat by Oliver's incubator, her hand resting gently on the clear plastic, she whispered, "You're stronger than you know. You've already beaten the odds. Keep fighting, baby boy." Her voice broke, and she wiped away a tear. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines, a reminder of how precarious their journey had become. Days in the NICU blurred into nights, each moment a delicate balancing act between hope and despair. Claire and Mike learned to measure progress not in leaps, but in tiny, fragile victories. Every ounce gained, every hour without a setback was a reason to celebrate. Yet the tension never left, a constant reminder of how precarious their situation was. At 2 weeks old, Grace showed remarkable improvement. Her oxygen levels stabilized, and the doctors began discussing the possibility of weaning her off the ventilator. "She's a little fighter," one of the nurses said, her voice warm with encouragement. Claire clung to those words like a lifeline. Seeing Grace's tiny chest rise and fall on its own felt like a miracle, a glimmer of light in the darkness. Oliver, however, remained critical. His lungs struggled to develop, and he faced a barrage of complications: an infection that required aggressive antibiotics, a heart murmur that needed constant monitoring, and frequent dips in his oxygen saturation. Claire spent every waking moment by his incubator, her hand resting gently on the clear barrier as if her touch alone could lend him strength. "I'm here," she whispered to him often, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'll always be here." One night, just as Claire and Mike allowed themselves a glimmer of hope for Grace's progress, the unthinkable happened. An alarm blared from Oliver's incubator, sending a wave of panic through the NICU. Nurses and doctors rushed in, their movements swift and purposeful as they assessed the situation. Claire's heart pounded as she clung to Mike, her eyes fixed on the tiny, fragile boy who seemed to be fighting with every breath. Dr. Ramirez arrived moments later, her expression calm but serious. Oliver's oxygen levels have dropped dangerously low, she explained. We're doing everything we can to stabilize him, but he's developed a condition called bronchopulmonary dysplasia. It's common in preemies with underdeveloped lungs, but it means his recovery will be much more challenging. Claire felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath her. What does that mean for him? She asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It means he'll need more support for a longer period of time. This isn't the end of the fight, Claire. It's just another hurdle. The next few days were agonizing. Oliver was placed on a high-frequency ventilator, his tiny chest vibrating with the machine's efforts to keep him breathing. Claire and Mike took turns sitting by his side, their whispered words of encouragement a constant presence. They refused to leave, even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Grace, meanwhile, continued to grow stronger. The day she was finally able to breathe without assistance felt like a monumental victory. "You're doing so well, sweet girl," Claire said, tears streaming down her face as she cradled Grace for the first time. Holding her daughter against her chest, feeling her tiny heartbeat, was a moment Claire would never forget. But even in that joy, her thoughts were with Oliver. "You're next," she whispered, her words a promise to the son who still fought his battle. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, painstakingly, progress was made. Grace was eventually strong enough to be discharged, a bittersweet milestone. Leaving the NICU with one baby while the other remained felt like leaving a piece of her heart behind. "We'll bring you home soon," Claire promised Oliver, her voice thick with emotion. "Just keep fighting, sweetheart." Back at home, Claire and Mike juggled the demands of caring for Grace while making daily trips to the hospital to visit Oliver. The strain was immense, but they refused to let it break them. Each visit brought new updates, some encouraging, others devastating. Oliver's road to recovery was anything but smooth, but he clung to life with a determination that left even the doctors amazed. Finally, at 4 months old, Oliver reached a milestone that once felt impossible. He was stable enough to go home. The day Claire and Mike carried him out of the hospital, bundled in a tiny blanket, felt like a dream. Tears flowed freely as they placed him in the car seat beside Grace, their family finally together. Life at home was chaotic but joyful. The twins required constant care, with frequent doctor's appointments and therapy sessions to address the challenges of their early start. But for Claire and Mike, every sleepless night, every tear-filled moment was worth it. Their babies were home, and that was all that mattered. As the months turned into years, Grace and Oliver continued to defy the odds. They grew stronger with each passing day, their laughter filling the house with a warmth Claire and Mike had once feared they'd never experience. The scars of their journey remained, visible in Oliver's tiny, faintly puckered chest from the surgeries, and in the memories that lingered like shadows. But they were reminders of just how far they'd come. One evening, as Claire watched her twins toddle across the living room, their giggles echoing through the house, she felt a wave of gratitude so overwhelming it brought her to tears. "We made it," she whispered to Mike, who wrapped an arm around her. "They made it." And though the journey had been fraught with fear and uncertainty, it was those very struggles that made every moment of their new life all the more precious. Together, as a family, they had weathered the storm and emerged stronger than ever. The quiet joy of life at home with Grace and Oliver felt too good to be true. Claire often found herself watching her twins sleep, their peaceful faces a reminder of how far they had come. But in the back of her mind, the lingering fear of complications never quite disappeared. Oliver had fought so hard to survive, and she knew his early struggles left him vulnerable. Still, she tried to focus on the present, savoring the moments of laughter and love that filled their home. It was during a routine feeding one morning that Claire noticed something was off. Oliver, who had always been a slower eater than Grace, refused his bottle entirely. His face was pale, and his tiny body seemed more lethargic than usual. Alarm bells rang in Claire's mind as she tried to coax him to take even a sip. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice trembling. But Oliver's head lolled to the side, and his breathing seemed labored. "Mike!" she called out, her voice thick with panic. Mike rushed into the room, his face paling as he saw Oliver's condition. "Something's wrong," Claire said, cradling their son protectively. "We need to get him to the hospital, now." The drive to the emergency room was a blur of flashing lights and mounting dread. Claire held Oliver close, her heart pounding as his tiny chest rose and fell unevenly. By the time they arrived, a team of nurses and doctors whisked him away, leaving Claire and Mike to pace the waiting room in anguished silence. Dr. Ramirez appeared after what felt like an eternity. Her face was calm but serious, a look Claire had come to associate with bad news. "Oliver has developed a condition called necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC, she explained. It's an intestinal complication that can occur in premature babies. Part of his bowel is inflamed and there's a risk of perforation." Claire's stomach dropped. "Is it life-threatening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ramirez nodded solemnly. "It can be, but we've caught it early. We're starting him on antibiotics and IV fluids to stabilize him. But if the inflammation doesn't improve, we may need to perform surgery to remove the damaged section of his intestine." The words hit Claire like a freight train. Surgery? After everything Oliver had already been through, the thought of putting him through more pain was unbearable. But she knew there was no choice. "Do whatever you have to do," she said, her voice breaking. "Just save him." The next 48 hours were critical. Oliver was placed in the pediatric intensive care unit, his tiny body hooked up to a maze of monitors and IV lines. Claire and Mike stayed by his side, their hearts breaking as they watched him fight yet another battle. Grace stayed with Mike's parents, her absence a constant ache in Claire's chest. But she knew she couldn't leave Oliver. At first, there were small signs of hope. Oliver's fever began to drop, and the inflammation seemed to stabilize. But on the third night, Claire was woken by the sound of alarms blaring from his monitors. Nurses rushed in, their faces tense with urgency. Claire clutched Mike's hand as they were ushered out of the room, her mind racing with fear. Dr. Ramirez appeared minutes later, her expression grim. "The antibiotics aren't enough," she said. "The inflammation has worsened, and there are signs of a perforation. We need to operate immediately." Claire felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. "Will he be okay?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Ramirez placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He's a fighter, Claire. We'll do everything we can." The hours that followed were some of the longest of Claire's life. She and Mike sat in the sterile waiting room, holding each other as they prayed for their son's survival. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them like a physical force. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Dr. Ramirez emerged from the operating room. Her scrubs were stained, and her face was weary, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," she said. "We removed the damaged section of his intestine and were able to reconnect the healthy tissue. He's stable for now, but the next 24 hours will be critical." Relief and exhaustion washed over Claire as she clung to Mike, her knees nearly giving out. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Oliver's recovery was slow and arduous. For weeks, he remained in the hospital, his tiny body fighting to heal from the trauma of surgery. Claire and Mike took turns staying with him, their lives revolving around his care. Grace visited often, her bubbly laughter a welcome respite from the tension, but Claire's heart ached for the day when their family could finally be whole again. Gradually, Oliver began to show signs of improvement. His color returned, and he started to gain weight. The day he took his first bottle after surgery felt like a triumph, a moment Claire had feared she might never see. "You're amazing, little man," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held him close. By the time Oliver was finally discharged, he had become a symbol of resilience. His journey had been anything but easy, but he had defied the odds time and time again. As Claire carried him through the hospital doors and into the waiting car, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Their family had been tested in ways she could never have imagined, but they had emerged stronger, bound by love and determination. At home, Claire watched as Grace and Oliver lay side by side, their tiny hands reaching for each other. In that moment, all the pain and fear of the past months melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They had fought for this, for their family, for their future, and they had won. And though the road ahead would still hold challenges, Claire knew one thing for certain. Together, they could face anything. Life settled into a cautious rhythm after Oliver's return home. The twins' nursery, once a place of silent worry, now echoed with laughter, coos, and the occasional wail. Every smile from Grace and every tiny milestone Oliver achieved felt like a victory over the dark months they had endured. Yet, the shadow of their earlier trials lingered in the background, a quiet reminder of how fragile life could be. For a few precious weeks, things seemed almost normal. Claire and Mike took the twins for walks in the park, basking in the sunlight and enjoying the simple joy of being a family. They celebrated Oliver's improved appetite and Grace's newfound love for rolling onto her stomach. "Look at them," Claire said one evening, watching the twins play on their colorful mat. "They're thriving." But life had one more test in store. It started subtly. Oliver seemed fussier than usual, rejecting his bottle more frequently and crying during feedings. Claire's instinct told her something wasn't right, but she wanted to believe it was just a phase. Babies were unpredictable, she told herself. Maybe it was teething or a minor stomach bug. Still, her anxiety grew as the days passed and Oliver's symptoms worsened. Then, one night, Claire was jolted awake by a sound she had come to dread. Oliver's cry, high-pitched and inconsolable. She rushed to his crib and found him pale and sweating, his tiny fist clenched in pain. "Mike!" she called, panic seizing her chest. "Something's wrong with Oliver." Mike was by her side in an instant, his face etched with worry. Together they bundled Oliver into his car seat and rushed to the hospital. Claire held him close during the drive, whispering reassurances she hoped he could feel, even if he didn't understand. At the hospital, the triage team moved quickly, recognizing the signs of distress. Oliver's belly was distended, and his cries were hoarse from hours of discomfort. Dr. Ramirez arrived shortly after they were admitted, her expression serious but calm. "What's happening to him?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez examined Oliver carefully before speaking. "It looks like he's developed a bowel obstruction," she explained. "This can sometimes happen after surgery, especially in cases like Oliver's where the intestines have been repaired. We'll need to do imaging to confirm, but if that's the case, we may need to operate again." Claire felt the weight of her fears crashing down on her. "Another surgery?" she asked, tears spilling over. "Hasn't he been through enough?" Dr. Ramirez placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. "I know how hard this is," she said gently, "but we need to act quickly to prevent further complications. He's a strong little boy, and he's proven he can fight through this." The hours that followed were a blur of tests, scans, and waiting. The imaging confirmed the worst. Oliver's intestines were blocked, and surgery was the only option. Claire and Mike held each other tightly as they signed the consent forms, their hearts breaking at the thought of their son enduring more pain. The surgery was a tense and delicate operation. Dr. Ramirez and her team worked tirelessly to remove the obstruction and repair the damage. Hours later, she emerged from the operating room, her scrub stained but her expression hopeful. "The surgery was successful," she said. "We were able to clear the blockage and ensure there's no further damage. He's stable now, but the recovery process will be critical." Claire and Mike let out a collective sigh of relief, though the tension in their hearts didn't fully ease. They knew from experience that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Oliver's recovery this time was even slower than before. His tiny body, already battered by months of challenges, struggled to regain strength. Claire spent every waking moment by his side, feeding him through a tube and singing softly to soothe him. "You're so brave," she whispered one night, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of small triumphs and setbacks. Oliver's weight fluctuated, his feeding issues persisted, and there were days when the exhaustion felt insurmountable. But through it all, Claire and Mike refused to give up. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, forged in the crucible of their shared struggles. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Oliver turned a corner. His weight began to climb steadily, his appetite improved, and his cries grew less frequent. The day he smiled for the first time since the surgery, Claire broke down in tears. "You did it, baby boy," she said, cradling him close. "You made it through." When Oliver was finally discharged, it felt like coming home for the first time all over again. The house was filled with balloons and signs from family and friends, celebrating his return. Grace babbled excitedly as her brother was placed beside her, her chubby hands reaching for him as if she'd missed him as much as Claire had. As the months passed, life slowly found a new rhythm. Oliver still required extra care, with regular checkups and therapy sessions to support his development. But his resilience amazed everyone who met him. Grace, ever the protective older sister by just a minute, seemed to sense her brother's journey and stayed close to his side. One evening, as Claire watched her twins playing together on the living room floor, their laughter filling the house, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their journey had been harder than she could have imagined, but it had also shown her the strength of love, the power of hope, and the incredible resilience of her children. "Look at them," Mike said, wrapping an arm around her. "We've been through hell and back, but they're here. We're here." Claire nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "They're miracles," she said softly. "Our little miracles." Though the scars of their journey would always remain, they were no longer just reminders of pain. They were symbols of survival, love, and a family that had fought with everything they had to be together. Months turned into years, and the shadows of Oliver's early struggles gradually gave way to the light of a brighter future. The twins, once so tiny and fragile, blossomed into lively, curious toddlers. Oliver still bore the occasional reminder of his journey, subtle scars from his surgeries, a slightly cautious gait during his first steps. But these were only markers of the battles he had won. Claire and Mike remained vigilant, ensuring Oliver's health was monitored closely. Regular appointments with specialists and therapists became part of their routine, but each visit brought positive news. "He's thriving," Dr. Ramirez said during a follow-up when Oliver turned 2. "He's not just surviving, he's thriving." The family celebrated every milestone with joy and gratitude. The day Oliver said his first word, "Mama," Claire wept, holding him close and whispering, "You've come so far." Grace, ever the spirited sibling, clapped enthusiastically, cheering on her brother. The twins' bond only deepened as they grew, their connection a testament to the strength they had given each other even before birth. Though life had resumed a sense of normalcy, the lessons of their harrowing journey were never far from Claire and Mike's minds. They became active advocates for neonatal care, sharing their story to raise awareness about the struggles faced by premature babies and their families. Claire spoke at fundraisers for the NICU that had saved Oliver's life, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "These babies fight harder than we can imagine," she often said, "and the people who care for them, doctors, nurses, therapists, they are the reason families like mine get to go home whole." On the twins' third birthday, Claire and Mike threw a party in their backyard, inviting family, friends, and even some of the medical staff who had become part of their lives. Dr. Ramirez attended, smiling warmly as she watched Oliver and Grace chase bubbles across the lawn. "I always knew he'd pull through," she said to Claire. "He has your strength." As the sun set that evening, Claire sat with Mike, watching their children play under a canopy of twinkling lights. Grace's laughter rang out as Oliver handed her a flower he had picked, his grin wide and unrestrained. "Look at them," Mike said, his voice soft with awe. "They're everything we dreamed they'd be." Claire leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart full. "They're more," she said. "They're our miracle." In that moment, as their children's laughter filled the air and the weight of the past finally felt lighter, Claire and Mike knew they had tied the loose ends of a story that had once seemed filled only with uncertainty. Their journey had tested them, broken them, and rebuilt them into something stronger. And now, their family stood as a testament to love, resilience, and the power of never giving up.